It's Sunday, June 23rd, 2019, and this is the Pro and the Con Show, and I'm your host, Michael James Ott. Welcome to the show. So the intent of the show, of course, is to try to look at the who, the what, the where, and the when, and look at some of the different information streams that some people are looking at for their news. Just looking at things and encouraging everyone to look at multiple sources to see what they are saying, how they're presenting the same news, basically, and from different viewpoints, because bias is a real thing, and we all are guilty of it, per se. So the one thing, so normally I would try to pick a news item that's on all five websites that I look at, from kind of left-leaning to right-leaning. And I tried that with one of these stories, and it's about Pete Buttigieg and some issues with the South Bend police force. And they've had some lethal shootings there of minority people. And so there's different treatments of this story across these things, and I wanted to talk about those different treatments of the story. Again, always trying to encourage you to do the same, for you to get out there and spend a little bit of extra time to understand what these different sources are saying. All right, but the other reason why I wanted to make the video and talk about this particular topic is that it's readily apparent that we have a social issue in our country, that the police forces across the nation, some better and worse than others, they are using lethal force, excessively. That's the best way I can say it. And there's stories through the years, the last handful of years. Some that come to my mind are a woman reports that she thinks she's hearing somebody getting raped in an alley. I think this was up here in the Minneapolis area. And so the police send a squad car in there, and the woman actually who reported this comes running up to the squad car to talk to them, to the police officers. And the officer, there's two officers in the car, and the officer on the opposite side of the car actually shoots across his partner and fatally wounds this woman. And so there's a couple aspects of this. So one is people are getting shot when they shouldn't be. And a lot of those people are minorities, okay, because bias and racism is a real thing, and it's bad and it's wrong, and we've got to do everything we can to try to figure out what we can do to fight it and stop it. But then the other part of it is, it just seems like the police officers have generally taken this shoot first and worry about the consequences later, and then it also seems like the consequences are not appropriate for these officers that have basically pulled the trigger when they shouldn't have. Let me clarify that. So this fellow who shot the woman, for example, in Minneapolis, clearly he should not have done that. There's not a question about whether he should or should not have done it. The question is, was he criminally culpable, and should he have lost his job over it? And that's where this just been an ongoing bigger and bigger issue, and it just seems to be escalating and accelerating, that people are being shot to death by the police forces around the nation, and again, in circumstances that certainly on the surface seem totally inappropriate, and then, even upon further reflection and review, are marginal at best. So anyway, Mr. Buttigieg, so let's get to the articles here. So let's go to the Huffington Post first. So they're generally the most left-leaning. And so the headline for their article says, Pete Buttigieg orders South Bend police to keep body cameras activated. So Mr. Buttigieg has been mayor of South Bend for about 8 years. And part of his reforms is that he directed, working through the police force, that they would have their body cams. Well, one, he got them all body cams, made sure they had them, and then two, directed that they would have them on when they are approaching civilians to do some kind of interaction. So in theory, this fellow who was recently shot there, it was a 54-year-old African-American man, was shot to death in a one-on-one where there were no witnesses other than this fellow who died. Obviously, he's no longer a witness, and the police officer who killed him. This should have been under the direction or the rule that this body cam should have been on, and so there should have been a video and audio recording of the entire event. And it's did not happen. And the initial thing that I read was that this was the body cams and stuff were supposed to come on automatically. The officer's in the car, and when he turns on, I think it's the siren or something, these body cam things automatically come on. Well, he didn't turn on the siren, and so the body cam didn't automatically come on. So he has, Mr. Buttigieg has directed that they manually, make sure that they're turned on. So anyway, so that's Huffington Post just kind of presented this. There's not a lot of rhetoric. Some of the emotional language that I talk about in my programs is not part of this. But then you go to CNN, and the headline is, under Pete Buttigieg, racial tensions have long plagued South Bend's police department. Now, this is written by two reporters, Dan Marica and Vanessa Yurkovich. And it's a very lengthy article, actually. It's a very well-written article. It's got a whole lot of who, what, where, when. Very little opinion. Now, there is some opinions in here, but these are just witnesses that said, I saw this, I observed this. So it's actually very well written, and it's quite lengthy. And it goes through the 8-year history here. So it starts with the recent shooting of this fellow. And then it goes into a lot of detail over the different aspects that have been pursued in South Bend under Mayor Buttigieg. So I just want to say that some of the people don't really like, and I think there's a significant portion of the minorities in South Bend, Indiana, that aren't very happy. And one of those saying that he took a passive approach with the police department. One of the first things that he did is they had an African-American police chief when he was elected, and he removed him from office and substituted a white Caucasian police chief. Now, this other fellow might have been highly qualified, but the fact is that when you make that change, it has a horrific appearance to it. And so if you read this article, and it's a great article, by the way, if you want to really find out what's happening in this particular case and some of the things that Pete Buttigieg did as mayor and also the council and so on. It's great, and so again, I want to give credit where credit is due. When someone writes a very well written, appropriate article, then you should say, hey, these guys did a great job. Bravo. Okay, lots of who, what, where, and when. Pete Buttigieg says that he's appointed people. There's a board of public safety, and the majority, so more than half of this board of public safety are minorities, and that's good, and that is good. Okay, but on the other side of the ledger, he removed this African American police chief, and right away, and then the number of people as new police officers have come into the police force, they've been all Caucasian, or almost all. And in fact, the last 6 he just recently spoke to, 6 officers that are coming into the force, and they were all Caucasians. And so the reality is that while the city of South Bend is roughly 25, 26, 27%, somewhere in there, African American, the police force was about 10% 8 years ago, and is now only 5%. And again, these are the kinds of things that, well, they don't lead people to have confidence in this. But again, you read the article, okay, it's great. So he's done some things, and trying to make sure that people are wearing and using these body cams and stuff, which I think was a great idea. I had this idea some time ago. I'm not saying that it was original idea, but I thought it was a great idea that all officers would have these video cameras on them, and they would be on at all times, and like saving a 12-hour loop of information. And so if something happened, there was some kind of event with a police officer, whatever that was would be fully recorded so it could be reviewed, and if nothing else, for training or whatever, but also in the case of if there's some wrongdoing, then this would be well documented, and give people confidence. And that's one of the things, given the onslaught of fatal shootings by police officers, I think there's a lot of Americans that are very concerned about their potential interactions with police officers, and of course minorities have unfortunately borne the brunt of many of those things, much more so than white Caucasian guys like me. So this is something that really, we really need to work on this. And you, the citizens, wherever you are viewing this, and even if you're a police officer, this is something that we all of us need to work on together. And I know that being a police officer is a very, very challenging and dangerous job. It's unbelievably dangerous. So how let's talk about that. Let's talk about how do we fix this in a holistic way. A police officer is walking down the street. Do the citizens around him have to behave in a certain way? Otherwise, he could take it as aggression, for example, or maybe, anytime a police officer approaches somebody and says, "Mister, I want to talk to you," you automatically, no matter who you are, don't care how poor, rich, or color, or size, or age, or whatever, you get your hands in the air. I'm not sure what the right answers are, but somehow, some way, we've got to get this taken care of. And I know that the body cams would help us at least identify the actual truth about these incidents. But anyway, so this is a great article. There's lots and lots of quotations from various people in the area, and then so they bring up one particular officer in South Bend, and I'm not going to mention his name. It's in the article. You read it, okay? But this one fellow is an officer who's worked there for many years, and he has a long history of excessive force allegations against him. And so they interview some people, and there's, tick, 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 tick. This fellow is involved in all of these excessive force issues, yet he's still an officer in the South Bend Police Force. And so you wonder why. How certain activities or certain aggressiveness is acceptable. So anyway, again, great article. Read it for yourselves. Come to your own conclusions. But having said that, now let's go. And that was in CNN, CNN Politics. If you search for him. Now, interestingly enough, on Breitbart, now I had to search around quite a bit and actually use the search function on Breitbart. But eventually I did find articles on Breitbart on Pete Buttigieg. And he says here, okay, so this is an article from a few days ago. Pete Buttigieg criticizes police culture after shooting in South Bend. And the article talks about him. And he's got some good quotes that actually weren't in the other articles. I don't know why, especially the comprehensive one by CNN. I would have thought they would have put this in here. But he's speaking to this new class of 6 officers coming into South Bend, and he says, there is great heroism in the quiet miracle of guiding a tense moment into a nonviolent resolution. He urged the 6 new officers to pursue a career of brilliant and skillful de-escalation. We count on you to help lift up those around you and the city as a whole, and you can do that in countless quiet ways that are far from the stuff of television drama, but will make a difference each and every day. We're dealing with a culture that still sometimes speaks of officers as if they were soldiers on the battlefield rather than members of the community. And then down further, Buttigieg also demanded that police officers take seriously their power to use lethal force in self-defense. Whenever you use those powers, here's the quotation, whenever you use those powers, you act in the name of an entire population. This is why it is inexpressibly important that you do not do so without competence, or not only with competence, but with wisdom, and that you act not only with restraint, but with equity. And he said, we cannot pretend that this is unrelated to race. So, on some sides, he's doing the right things and talking to people, and some good words here. And again, you can read this yourself. It's there on Breitbart. Okay. So anyway, just some final thoughts from me. So I've talked in the past, and I'll talk about in the future, that racism is a real thing. And it can be subtle, or it can be very much the opposite of subtle. that can be in your face, unbelievably oppressive. And so when you think of racism, it's not just, killing people of color or whatever. It's there's an entire spectrum of behaviors that are bad and inappropriate. And the police forces around the country are unleashing lethal force on people. And sometimes it's on white and Caucasian people, but a lot of it is upon people of color. And this has to stop. They have to, the police forces, the court systems, the jurors around the country, we got to step forward and make a change here. A conscientious, verifiable, societal change. All right, well, for Sunday, June 23rd, 2019, my name is Michael James Ott. Hope to talk to you again on a future show. And until then, bye for now.